Sandra Pupatello and then Harinder Takar.
Thanks. I just think it's important for us as Liberals to have an opportunity to talk about important things for all of us in a society that make us Liberals for sure, and frame it in a way that the general public can come along with us, because this is where we're at in the center of the spectrum. We have to talk about social housing. Even if the federal government's backed out of it completely, we've got to figure out how to do it. And I want to be creative on that front and recognize we don't have a lot of money for all these things. Some of it doesn't take a lot of money. Some of it takes creativity. Some of it takes some really global practices around building social housing, while introducing NGOs, non-government type agencies and the private sector to do so. We can do it. It's been done in other places in our own country. We can do it in Ontario as well. We've got to frame the discussion around immigrants and moving them into their professions they're skilled at into an economic argument for Ontario. We need them to be skilled. Even if it takes a little bit of help to get them there, we're going to do that because we need that workforce. We've got to be able to frame, and as a leader, I need to be able to frame for us to go to the general public and say, this is why we need to help everybody in our communities, not just the folks that have already got a great job, but the ones that we need to help move up to the next level of job or come off the system back into the workforce. We do that well. I believe that's what differentiates us against the others. So when I'm up there against Horvath or Hudak, we will have those examples of what we've done to make it better for people in Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pupatello. Harinder Takar.
I think I want to go back to the basics. Who do we need as immigrants in Ontario? We need the people whose skills are actually employable in Ontario. If that means we need to bring electricians, if that means we need to bring people with welding skills or machinists, that's what we need. I think if that can happen, then some of these issues that we are raising actually can be solved. The second is we need to realize as a government that we need to realize that one plan doesn't really fit everyone. Whether we are talking about the issue of the poverty or we are talking the issue of the immigrants. If some people maybe need to upgrade their skills, so they need to have a bridge program. The other people maybe need assistance with affordable housing. The third people maybe need assistance with finding jobs. So we need to have portable where we can actually match the skills of the people with the requirements of the jobs that is available out there. And the third point I want to make is that these people that come to our province actually have very diverse skills. We need to use their skills to their full potential. And they can actually open international markets for us because they know what we can produce here, which is actually can be sold in the international markets, and whatever is in the international markets, so they can actually help us to do the bilateral trade. So we need to become really a little bit of innovative to use the skills of the people who are here or who do we bring into this province.
Thank you, Mr. Takar. We have time for very brief additional comments. So Mr. Murray caught my eye, Mr. Kennedy caught my eye, Ms. Wynne.
These things, as my friend David Crombie always says, everything is connected to everything else. We've got to move beyond this idea that the only way to manage a budget and poverty issues is by cutting costs or raising taxes, because it doesn't work. We raised the tax on high net worth individuals. We lost money because they relocated so much of their income to Alberta, and that was said at the time. My angel investment tax credit and the other tax credits I'm proposing bring in $3.5 billion more tax revenue. I worked on this with the dean of the Rotman School. This works. We need those $3.5 billion. When we canceled community startups, we're not going to save any money. We're going to cost money. I proposed 50,000 new housing units by doing exactly what we did in Winnipeg, which was actually using land banking, except our government sold out all the land in my constituent out for under us, and that whole community process where we brought all governments together, as some are suggesting, wasn't listened to. So when I say listening to MPPs, cabinet ministers have to be in charge of files. MPPs have to be listened to. They're more important than bureaucrats and crown corporations. And that's what I'll restore. When we restore that, we'll start saving money. I just one last sentence. When I was mayor of Winnipeg, I cut taxes by 11% and cut the debt in half, and the credit rating went up 5 times. I can bring that expertise to this government. I don't think anyone else has led a government with that track record before.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Kennedy.
Well, I think there's something that we understood well in education, other things that we've done. There's got to be a virtuous circle where the things that we want to do because they're the right things also deliver a political benefit. The fact is, if we start constructing this in how the benefits accrue to society, not just to the individuals, instead of talking about social programs as cost, we've started down that road. If we start understanding where are people at in Ontario today, it's uncertainty for themselves, for their kids and so on, and what's going to happen, and having programs that help people bounce back more quickly, that lend stability to people more instantly, and don't have people linger in the problems of poverty, I think are things that the whole population wants to start and see address how they're feeling about themselves and about the prospects for others.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Ms. Wynne.
I just wanted to say very briefly that we have got great examples of projects in Ontario. We've built or renovated 22,000 units of affordable housing since we came into office. We've got great examples of community collaboratives. Visited with Yasser Beaver Barracks, the Elm Centre in Toronto, Good Shepherd Home in Hamilton. So we know this can be done. We've already seen it done in the province, and so we need to make sure that we take those best examples and move them forward. That is our task going forward, and I think it's it's part of our next poverty reduction initiative.
Thank you, Ms. Wynne. Last comments go to Eric Hoskins.
Well, we've talked about immigrants so far in this section. We've also talked about those living in poverty, but we have an additional responsibility to our First Nations communities. 70% of our reserves in this province are living under a boil water advisory, where the children and the families don't have access to clean water. The graduation rate of our First Nations communities, our children in those communities, is half what it is for those who are not living on reserve or who are not First Nations. So we have, and in terms of poverty rates and the child welfare challenges that are faced, mental illness and addictions. So we have a great responsibility, I think, as well, and there's obviously a historical component to it. But when we're talking about poverty, and I know, Kathleen, you did mention this briefly just a few moments ago, we need to make sure that we also are deliberate in our intent to reduce and eliminate poverty, plus provide the level of respect and dignity that we owe to our First Nations.
Thank you, Mr. Hoskins. Charles Sousa gave me a look there. Did you want to talk?
I'm a married man. My wife is watching,
Not that kind of look.
Just quickly, we have had a good economic recovery since the recession. And this is not about building the economy for economy's sake. This is about building this for our children and our future's sake. But we have about 8% unemployment. We have around 18% unemployment for our youth, and it's about 27% unemployment for those new Canadians. And all the more reason we need to get this right so that we make everybody work at their best. And this is not so much a cost as it is an investment in our future. So all I want to say is that we're not talking about making more government here. We're talking about making more opportunity. Now go hit on somebody else.
Thank you, Mr. Sousa. Does anybody else have any comments? That closes out this portion of the debate. Segment 3. So our final segment this evening is about the environment and energy. Our government created the Green Belt, is eliminating dirty coal-fired electricity generation, and brought in the Endangered Species Act. What's the next big idea to help preserve Ontario's environment for future generations? The first to respond is Charles Sousa.
I just released an energy platform. I think I talked about that in my opening remarks. And the premise of it is all about local input, local actions, and local control. And in it, I talk a lot about not only listening to communities, I also talk about being fair to the recent FIT programs, initiatives that we brought forward. But more importantly, let's develop thermal energy, geothermal, as an opportunity for us to harness some of the very premise and clean energy that exists in our communities. Do you know that in Sweden, it's 80% of their resource? And here in North America, it's only about 1%. So we have a huge untapped potential to do something cleaner and sustainable. The other one is enabling our companies to co-generate. There's an opportunity for us to take advantage of some of the existing programs And it also acts as an incentive for those communities that are trying to entice and attract new investment. There's another thing that I brought forward in the platform, and that's around energy storage. The windmills and solar only operate at certain times of the day. We need to do something to store those facilities even more. And we've got the technology in Ontario to do some of that, and we can export some of this abroad. And it also helps to make some reductions, which everyone is talking about in terms of being competitive in Ontario versus other parts of the world. Another critical part of our energy policy, oh, you give him time, is, I'll end with this.
Go ahead.
Conservation is key to what we do going forward. I'll save my rest of my remarks for later.
Thank you. Glenn Murray.
Okay, you can take a sentence off mine now, okay? I led a team that did Calgary's energy plan, and I think we've done some great things. And the other provinces do something very different than we do. They actually plan it out. They go into a community, and we measured how energy was used in Calgary. In the suburbs, in the downtown, at the airport, realized the profiles were all different. Then we actually asked people what they wanted, and we explained to them how thermal works to heat and cool your home, that it's not electricity. That downtown you can do thermal transfer between buildings and cogen, and where solar and water could be brought in. Then we connected it, we were funded by the Royal Bank, to then look at how you integrate water and energy planning, because water and sewage is the biggest single energy user. And Calgary redesigned its city, thanks very much, redesigned its city to redirect 30,000 hectares of development. They're saving, according to the mayor, about $32 billion in infrastructure, building, and construction costs over the next few years. I will bring that to Ontario. And the final thing is, government MPPs and MLAs in Alberta and BC where they're doing this are getting elected and are widely popular over their Energy Act. I think we had the right things in closing coal plants. We just didn't get the planning right, and we didn't get the consent of communities properly, and I'll change that.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Sandra Pupatello.
Thanks. My economic development policy I tabled last week, a big part of that was on energy, because energy has so much to do with our economic development in every region of Ontario. And a big part of that is, what do we do next? We've had the Green Energy Act, for example. We know that. Our implementation, I'm just going to say, was likely less than stellar, and we need to improve that. And what I am intending to do is have a total rethink on, the number of agencies that we have, for example. You've got an agency that does policy on transmission over here, and an agency over here that does the policy on generation, but they don't usually talk to each other. So it's resulted in a lot of things getting bunged up in the system, and it's caused some pain for people. The whole notion of having communities wanting to be willing hosts for generation is an important one. And I've got to say that we've got to learn our lesson from what didn't work and be prepared to go to the people in those communities, whether it was Carol Mitchell or Leona Dombrowski, and say, we get it. We're going to fix this. But importantly, we want to move forward, and it's in my plan on the website to look through and see. The next big stage is development in a sustainable way, and a government that can incent that to happen in Ontario. That's going to be our next big move on green energy. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Pupatello. Gerard Kennedy.
So I think the next big is small. It's talking to Ontarians about their bill. It's about letting them know that whole profusion of numbers, what it really means in terms of how our initiatives are impacting them. And one of them, for example, is the power needs of Ontario may be such that we may not need to build new nuclear. That's something that may eventually eliminate new debt charges and so on. And we really have to start being better at that conversation. It is an economic advantage. And I was at the cabinet table where people said, well, we're not going to subsidize anymore. But, you know, frankly, that's not a position that we can hold in terms of how our energy supply goes forward. But what we need to make sure that people appreciate is that we are listening not only to them, but to the future. I mean, there's 90% of the particulate matter out of the air now. That much less children affected by asthma because we closed the coal-fired plants. And yes, we have to admit there's mistakes that we've made, and there's implementation that we can do, and there's a price to being credible for that. We have to acknowledge where that problem is. We have to appear in those communities, and we have to fix those things. But the big idea, I think, is simply to reestablish people as being part of this going forward, because they haven't felt that they have been. Thanks.